Hello and welcome to TiVo, where we talk about tactics, their evolution, and how those tactics influence specific matches and general trends as well. Today we are dissecting a match between Watford and Manchester United. Happened recently with a 4-1 victory to Watford, the Hornets. Before we move on to the main event, we'll be looking at the pre-match context, the build-up, focusing on Manchester United as they have been generating a lot of debate and managerial drama recently. Let's now take a look at some data detailing and illustrating the ongoing travails of Manchester United. In blue, we are looking at outcome, which is the difference between goals scored and goals conceded. In orange, we're looking at the underlying performance, measured by the difference between expected goals and expected goals against. And focusing in on that underlying performance, we can see a wobbly, even undulating trend. Some positive performances earlier in the season, contrasted with poor performances against Leicester, Liverpool and Manchester City especially. Now, Man United tend to have quite a lot of the ball in their matches. They have done this season. They register quite a lot of completed passes. But what they are often critiqued for is the extent to which they can progressively move the ball up the field. A progressive pass is defined by FBref, which is the source of the information that you see before you, as a pass that moves the ball forward towards the opponent's goal at least 10 yards from its furthest point in the last 6 passes. Or it can be a completed pass into the penalty area. The point being that this is a player taking a risk, a pass that's more likely to be actively defended or intercepted in order to progress the ball up the field. The problem that Manchester United have is illustrated by the size of the orange data that you see in front of you. They don't make a huge number of progressive passes, and in recent times they have been making fewer and fewer. Let's contrast that with the same information for Chelsea. They are similar to Manchester United in 2 respects. They tend to come up against opposition with inferior players, therefore tending to have most of the ball. However, they are relatively passive when they come up against opposition with superior players, as we arguably saw in the Champions League final. What they are, though, is they are much more efficient with that possession. Indeed, you can see in the round of fixtures prior to the Watford match, Chelsea were able to decrease the number of completed passes, so conceding more possession, but were able to increase the number of progressive passes. And more simply, if you look from the left to the right hand side, in general they are making an improvement in that regard. We will now take a look at the match itself and how it unfolded. Before that, we're going to look at the tactical approach of each team. Looking at the formations, Watford lining up in a 4-3-3, looking to concede possession most of the time. Manchester United had a lot of the ball, but looking to push up, crucially, and aggressively press Manchester United when they were deep in possession. And of course, counter-attack, both of which they did extremely successfully during the match. To be honest, it wasn't entirely obvious what tactical instruction Manchester United were attempting to follow during this match. What was painfully obvious and ultimately resulted in Ole Gunnar Solskjaer leaving his position was that it didn't work, and towards the end of the match it was really quite shambolic. Watford were the opposite of shambolic, with a very clearly defined and well executed game plan. As I've said, they wanted to aggressively push back Manchester United and press. You can see through the average player positions through the website whoscored.com that where United had possession of the ball, it was mainly in deeper areas, allowing Watford to be aggressive and push forward and press that situation. Where United were on the attack, Watford were able to counter very successfully. Before we look at the specifics of the match and how that unfolded, we're going to be taking a look at the overall team performance. We're going to start here by looking at expected goals and possession. Watford created better quality chances, which is what the 2.2 means in relation to the 1.6. They had less of the ball, but that didn't matter because they were much more efficient with the ball. We looked before at completed and progressive passes in the lead up to this match between Watford and Manchester United. Now we're going to look at the stats from the match itself. So on the left hand side you can see that Watford completed 255 passes. On the right, Manchester United considerably more, 450 passes. Yet they only made 2 more progressive passes. And what we can see by the 7.1%, which is just 32 in relation to 450, versus the 11.8%, which is 30 in relation to 255, is that when Watford had the ball, which was less of the time, they were able to be much more efficient in their use of the ball, and specifically here in the extent to which they progressively moved the ball towards Manchester United's goal. But of course you need to be playing the ball into the final third. Ultimately the objective is to score goals, not just progress the ball up the field. So here you can see the same type of data that we saw before, but instead of progressive passes, this is passes into the final third. And you can see here that Watford are even more efficient than Manchester United in doing so. United again have more of the ball, but they made fewer passes into the final third. And once you are into the final third, the next frontier, not quite the final one, is getting the ball into the penalty box. So here we're looking at the combination of passes and crosses into the penalty box. Same analytics here, looking at completed passes, looking at those passes and crosses into the penalty box, and working out a ratio. 5.6% for Manchester United, considerably higher, more than double in fact, is the extent to which Watford were again efficient in converting their more limited number of passes, which would be a good proxy for amount of possession in the match, much more efficient in getting the ball into the box. Having looked at some data both in the build-up to the match and for the match itself, we are now going to be taking a look at why the match unfolded in the way that it did. I'm going to take a look at 3 points now, helping to explain Manchester United's demise in this particular match. The first is United's difficulty in defending wide areas of the pitch. This has been quite well documented and commented on recently. It's to do with the way that United leave quite a lot of space between their fullbacks and their wide forwards. They play 2 defensive midfielders, in this case McTominay and Matic, and that gives those two quite a lot of space to cover, because generally speaking, Sancho's recent performances might be an exception to this. United's wingers or wide forwards are not doing a huge amount of defensive work, hence a big gap between fullback and wide forward or wingers, hence a lot of difficulty in covering that space and stopping the opposition dominating that space. The second point here is fairly obvious for anyone watching these matches to see, and is to do with individual defensive errors. For example, Maguire's form has been somewhat wobbly recently. Wan-Beessaka perhaps not as defensively astute as he has been in the past, and Shaw as well seemingly falling from the heights of last year. The third point here is the one that we're going to focus on for the remainder of this video. It's to do with Manchester United's misuse of Wan-Beessaka. He is a very talented defender, particularly effective in his one-on-one duels and the extent to which he can win those and come away with the ball. He is at times very effective in his last-ditch defending. People would argue about his positioning there, but I don't think many people would debate whether he is a good defender. What they would debate is how effective he is further up the pitch. He is actually quite fleet of foot, having been a winger in his earlier days as a player. His crossing is okay. His passing ability, though, in the final third, his ability to spot and in particular execute an effective pass in that position of the pitch is where he is deficient. And right at the end of the video, we're going to look at how a change in tactical approach in formation could make much better use out of Wan-Beessaka, who is, as I say, a talented player for United. And on to the match itself. Before we move on to the negatives and how to correct that stuff, we're going to look at the extent to which Wan-Beessaka plays an effective role in a phase of play in which Manchester United already excel. These could be described as fast attacks. So some of these would be, technically speaking, counter-attacks. At other times, it is just simply moving the ball up the field quickly. And what's happened in this sequence of play in this match is that Watford have gone long, Manchester United have retrieved the ball, and they are very quickly moving the ball up the field. And you can see a huge amount of space on the field, in particular a big gap between Watford's forward players and their midfield players. What happens is that Fernandes switches the ball out to Sancho. It isn't a particularly good pass. He has to work hard to keep it in. And what Sancho is able to do is knock the ball to Wan-Beessaka, who is highlighted at the top of the pitch. Wan-Beessaka receives the ball from Sancho on the wing, and he's able to play the ball back inside to Fernandes. The point again here is about the context of this passage of play. Watford, as you can see, the two players moving towards the ball, but not especially aggressively nor effectively, and United can pop the ball between them, again moving fairly quickly up the pitch. Wan-Beessaka then plays the ball into the feet of McTominay, who moves to the left-hand side of the defender really effectively, having feinted to move forward and then to move to the side, thus enabling United to break into the final third there. McTominay, with time and space on the ball, not a huge amount of pressure on it, is able to pick a good pass into the on-running Rashford. Of course, it's a feature of his game that he can come to the ball, check to the ball, as they say, and receive the ball to feed, but also he's able to stretch the play in behind, which is something that United arguably have been missing in recent matches. This passage of play doesn't really come to anything. The defender ends up recovering the ball, but it is a good exhibit or example of a type of play that United really excel at, which is, as I said before, a fast attack, a fast transition up the field. They struggle when they need to play more patiently and break down the opposition, which we'll see later on. And in stark contrast to that, here we can see a passage of play in which Wan-Beessaka does not adequately perform the role that he's being asked. He ends up playing actually initially a really neat 1-2 with Sancho. As I mentioned, he does have quite quick feet. He's able to play at times effectively in tight spaces, but his final ball and in general his distribution is not a strength of his. Wan-Beessaka then, having received the ball back from Sancho, is tasked with playing a relatively simple pass into the on-rushing Fernandes, who would then be supported with his run into the penalty area by Rashford. He's not under a huge amount of pressure. As I say, certainly at this level, it's a relatively simple pass, but it doesn't come off, as we'll see. Wan-Beessaka overhits the pass into the expectant Fernandes, who is disappointed, and you can see extreme disappointment in the arm gestures of Ronaldo down to the bottom left. And in general, he did look uncomfortable in this match, especially when he's been asked to play effectively in the final third or otherwise in forward areas. This next passage of play is interesting for a couple of reasons. It shows again how Wan-Beessaka is uncomfortable in certain situations, but it also shows how there's a structural deficit in United's approach in this match and in previous matches, where they don't appear to have set kind of semi-automatic routines, which often coaches at this level tend to institute through the coaching. So they end up with the ball in a deep area. McTominay is looking for a pass, but you can see the five players here are too close together, and there's not an obvious route out. The space is over to the left-hand side. You can see Fernandes pointing to that box on the ground. That's where the space is, but McTominay's body position and orientation is not going to allow him easy to find Fernandes, and he needs to look out to the right where there isn't much space, and Wan-Beessaka ends up in an uncomfortable position on the ball. And as advertised, Wan-Beessaka ends up on the right-hand side of the ball from McTominay, but he's being asked to do something which he finds difficult, which is play a dinked pass down the line. Sancho is a willing runner. He makes that option for him, which is the right thing for him to do to try and break out of this situation. But playing that sort of pass is not Wan-Bissaka's strength, and they end up losing the ball. And what happens here a little bit later in the game is that Matic finds Wan-Beessaka out on the right-hand side. He's then going to look to combine with Fernandes, but he's arguably just playing too far up the pitch, and this is not his strength. His strength is in defending and in deep areas with the opposition coming onto them, or in transition, effectively defending against counter-attacks. Playing threaded passes, crossing the ball, he's okay at, but you wouldn't say that that's his strength. I do think it requires a change in approach, a change in formation, which we'll come on to get the best out of this player. Wan-Beessaka exchanges the ball with Rashford, who's pulled to the right-hand side along Fernandes. Rashford plays a good ball, good weight of pass down the line, where Wan-Beessaka is running onto the ball. So he's in his approach to the situation, he's doing everything right. But United do end up losing the ball because Wan-Beessaka can't beat the first man with his cross. One of the other aspects of Wan-Beessaka playing high up the pitch is he ends up doing so much last-ditch defending. This is really a feature of his game, and he is quite effective in these positions. But United ultimately concede a lot of chances and lose a lot of goals because of all this last-ditch defending and this kind of racing towards their own box. If you call the previous video, in stark contrast, Manchester City's highly organised, regimented, almost militarized approach to defending counter-attacks and transitions is completely different. They have a structure, they have a 3-2 block, which a variety of different players fill. With United, it does look like a bunch of talented players realizing that they've lost the ball and trying desperately to retrieve the situation, which doesn't seem like an appropriate approach at this elite level of the game. Of course, it's very easy to point out problems, but what are the proposed solutions to this? It was really interesting, the role and the performance of Van de Beek when he came on in the second half, because what he was able to do is actively support Wan-Beessaka and Sancho on the right hand side, at times allowing Wan-Beessaka to play a little bit deeper, although I think he needs to play even deeper in the structure of United's side. But what was interesting is that they more effectively progressed the ball down the right due to the technical ability of Van de Beek. And we can see here a capture of Van de Beek's touches. You can see that they are concentrated towards the right-hand side of the pitch, but notably the cluster towards the top right of the screen here, in the right back or right wing back position. Again, you can see how he is effectively supporting that side of the pitch, combining at times effectively with Wan-Beessaka and Sancho. Wan-Beessaka emerges with the ball from this passage of play in United's right back area of the pitch, and he's then able to find Fernandes in space, who of course is going to be able to effectively progress the ball with his ability up the pitch. In the next passage of play, Fernandes, as you can see, has the ball in an advanced area, is going to be able to link up with Martial. He's going to feed it out to the right to Sancho, who can put a cross in for Ronaldo, heads the ball back to Van de Beek. So that's an effective role for Van de Beek, breaking forward, kind of box-to-box midfielder role. You can see Wan-Beessaka in the bottom right-hand side of the pitch is supporting, crucially, this part of Manchester United's attacking play, rather than being actively involved in it. You can see this through, at times, the Manchester City setup, where you will have a player who will be able to circulate the ball should the build-up not be successful, and that arguably is a more appropriate role for him. Here we can see a bit later on Wan-Beessaka combining with Sancho and Van de Beek, initially quite effectively towards the top end of the pitch. And he can do this because he can rely on the technical ability of Sancho and or Van de Beek to play that final pass. But what happens is they end up caught out defensively because there's a huge amount of the right-hand side of the pitch for Watford to exploit. So what they could do instead, for example, is rather than Wan-Beessaka pushing up and supporting this passage of play, is that Martial and or Ronaldo or someone else with more attacking ability can push out towards the right-hand side to create that overload, with Wan-Beessaka giving more defensive stability further back. And here's the final example just after that passage of play down the right-hand side for United. Watford break quickly with numbers and end up overloading United in this counter-attack situation. So it is the case that they don't really seem to have an effective plan to defend these transitions. It's almost like if the attack doesn't work out, then we'll use our pace of recovery, especially someone like Wan-Beessaka, to rescue the situation, which doesn't really seem a sustainable way of playing. And in conclusion, if we return to the question of the structure of the Manchester United approach, both without and with possession, we can see here a typical scenario from this match and many others where Watford are pressing high up the pitch, putting pressure on a probably nervous back line. Lindelof is here going to look out in this illustrative example, play the ball out to Wan-Beessaka, but we can see that that's not his strength because he then needs to progress the ball further up the pitch. It doesn't feel like a very sophisticated approach to almost treat Wan-Beessaka and Shaw as if they have the same sort of skill set, when clearly they don't. United do look to favour the left-hand side, which I guess is partly due to the presence of Shaw, who has higher technical ability to Wan-Beessaka. And you can see at times teams pushing United out towards the right-hand side to isolate Wan-Beessaka, when I think with a tweak in the formation in possession, which we'll look at in a second, would be a more effective way of utilising both of those fullbacks' respective ability. What they could do, of course, and there are many examples around Europe of teams, Barcelona would be an obvious one, where Alba pushes high up the pitch and the right back sits deeper. In possession, they could play more this sort of formation, Wan-Beessaka staying deeper in order to capitalise on his defensive abilities, Shaw pushing much higher up the pitch. It will be fascinating to see whether Rangnick, the new manager, will make better use of Wan-Bissaka's talents. And that is it for now on the ongoing trials and tribulations created by Manchester United tactics. As said, it would be fascinating to see how Rangnick, the new interim manager, adapts and progresses the United approach. If you like this video, please express that like by hitting the like button. While you're at it, hit the subscribe button, and we will see you next time.